Today's limud is Haggadah Shel Pesach, and we are Be'ezus Hashem holding at the 12th and final shiur of this segment of the shiurim on the Haggadah Shel Pesach. It's the last shiur, again, for this segment on Magid. B'chol dar v'dar chayiv adam lirois es atzmai ki'ilu hu yatsa miMitzrayim. So the overwhelming majority of the shiurim, and certainly the last 8 or 9 shiurim, focused on one of the 15 simanim that we have b'tchivas haseder, and that is Magid. And that is when we tell the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. We saw that a lot of what we discuss in Magid is rooted in Chazal. Mishnayos in Perek Arvei Psachim, Mechiltas in Sefer Shmois, Sefris in Sefer Dvarim. One of the halachas that the Mishnah says one is required to do in order to fulfill this mitzvah properly is a person has to figure out a way to visualize and conceptualize as if he himself was a slave in Egypt, and that tonight HaKadosh Baruch Hu is taking him out of Mitzrayim. And it's with that halacha that we begin this shiur. B'chol dar v'dar chayiv adam liris es atzmai ki'ilu hu yatsa miMitzrayim. In every single generation, doesn't matter how far removed we are from the actual Exodus, a person has an obligation to be able to see himself as if he left Mitzrayim. Shenemar, the pasuk says, you are going to tell your child, that's because of this, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu took me out of Mitzrayim. In other words, HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't only take out our grandfathers, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu took us out as well. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, in other words, when the father is talking to his son, he's not only telling him what happened to him, but he's including his son, who was actually not alive at the time, in the Yetziah. He took me out, but he took you out as well. What do you mean, he took you out? He didn't take you out, he took me out. The teretz is, B'chol dar v'dar chayiv adam lirois es atzmai ki'ilu hu yatsa miMitzrayim, and it's the obligation of the father and the child, and even us 3,338 years later, to be able to somehow come to a point where we feel like we were slaves in Mitzrayim, but v'itzanu haitzi misham, HaKadosh Baruch Hu took us out of Mitzrayim. And we continue. Lefichach anachnu chayavim. It's for this reason. And according to most Rishonim, the segue is because of the fact that we have to view ourselves as if we were slaves in Mitzrayim, and that HaKadosh Baruch Hu took us out. It's for that reason that we are obligated, chayavim, l'hoidos, l'hala, l'shabech, l'father, l'roimim, l'hader, l'varich, l'alu, l'kalis. All different lishonos of praise to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. L'misha asalav yiseinu v'lanu es kol hanisamayelu, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who performed these miracles, v'lanu, because again, chayiv adam liris es atzmai ki'ilu hu yatsa miMitzrayim, all these miracles, hitziyanu me abdus l'cheres. HaKadosh Baruch Hu took us from abdus l'cheres, mi yagayin l'simcha. He took us from a place where we were depressed, we were very sad, and now all of a sudden we're happy. Umei eva liyantav. HaKadosh Baruch Hu took us from being in a state of Avelus, now we're celebrating Yontif. We were living in a proverbial darkness, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu took us to a place where not only were we exposed to Ar, but we were exposed to an Ar Gadol. We were mishupadim. We had zero freedom, very similar to Abdos. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu Hatins oskelized. He took us to Geula. He gave us redemption. The Noimar Lefan of Shira Chadasha, and it's for that reason we have an obligation, we have a responsibility to give HaKadosh Baruch Hu a Shira Chadasha, Hallelujah, and that's going to segue into the next part of the Haggadah, and that is we're going to begin reciting the Hallel. So let's just hit the pause button very early in this year and just figure out what we just did. So we just quoted an excerpt from one of the Mishnayos in Perek Avri Psachim, which discusses another halacha in the laws of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, Chayav Adam Liris Es Atzmai, Kilu Hu Yatzim Mitzrayim. And then we said, because of the fact that Chayav Adam Liris Es Atzmai, Kilu Hu Yatzim Mitzrayim, that requires us, that obligates us to give Haidah and Hilul, L'Shabech, L'Fal, L'Roimim, L'Hadel, L'Varach, L'Alei, L'Kades. And it's for that reason, the V'Noiva L'Fan of Shir Chadasha Hallelujah, and that's going to usher in us reciting the Hallel. A few things. First of all, it feels like, from just reading the words, that the reason we recite the Hallel at the Leil HaSeder is because Chayav Adam Lirois Es Atzmai Ki'ilu Hu Yatzim Mitzrayim. Just the Pshutei Shal Mikra of what we just read. B'chol dar v'dar chayav adam liros es atzmai ki'ilu hu yatzim miMitzrayim. Lefichach anachnu chayavim v'noimar lefanav. Some have the gersa v'nemar lefanav shir chadasha hallelujah, and that's gonna bring us now to the fact that we're gonna say Hallel. Truth is, Kana ben Shoyal, we need a excuse for why we're saying Hallel. We're gonna say Hallel the next morning, the morning after that, the day after that. Every single yontif we say Hallel. Why do we need an excuse to say Hallel? So, Pashit, the teretz is, we always say Hallel, but we say Hallel as part of Shachris, we say Hallel during the day. We never say Hallel yontif by night, and it seems that even though the Leil HaSeder is this big deal, and we're doing things by the Leil HaSeder that are different than what we do b'chol haleilos, that is in fact one of the themes of the Seder, but at the same time, to say Hallel mehechatesi. The only reason we say Hallel by the Leil HaSeder is because Chayav Adam Liris Es Atzmai Kilu Hu Yatzim Mitzrayim. And here's the point. We're not just saying Hallel, thank you Hashem for something that you did to our Zaydis thousands of years ago. You're saying Hallel because you yourself just experienced a miracle. And if you experienced a miracle today, you would literally spring into giving Haidah to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that's exactly what we're doing. So if a person's able to execute the avodah of the Seder properly, and he's able to start the Seder Avodim Hayinu L'Par B'Mitzrayim, and he's able to conclude the Seder with Vayotzienu, and do it in a way where he has this hamchasha of Ki'ilu Hu Yatzimi Mitzrayim, well, he just experienced a great miracle. And if he just experienced a great miracle, he's obligated to go give Haidah. In other words, when the Hallel is because of something that happened thousands of years ago, then you say Hallel by day, you don't say Hallel by night. But this Hallel is because Chayav Adam Liris Es Atzmai, and being that that's the reason you're saying Hallel, so that's Mechayev to say Hallel by day, by night, it doesn't matter when. The reason we're going to say Hallel by the Leil HaSeder is related to Chayav Adam Liris Es Atzmai. That's the Lefichach. Because Chayav Adam Liris Es Atzmai, therefore we have an obligation to give Haidah. Just to say this in a different nusach, there'd be mokken to say that Lefichach is really referring to the whole avodah of the Leil HaSeder. The Rishonim say Lefichach is going on Chayav Adam Liris Es Atzmai Ki'ilu Hu Yatzim Mitzrayim. Because we have an obligation to feel as if HaKadosh Baruch Hu performed a miracle with us, that obligates us to say Hallel, and that Chi of Hallel transcends the regular Shulchan Aruch of Hallel. So usually Hallel is governed by certain laws. Well, this Chi of Hallel is a different Chi of Hallel, and this is related to the fact that we ourselves experienced a miracle, and being that we ourselves experienced a miracle, that therefore would require us to say Hallel, even to say Hallel by night. Another point that's worth mentioning, so the last thing we say in the world of Magid is Chayav Adam Liris Es Atzmai Kilu Hu Yatzim Mitzrayim. But really, if you pay attention, we've been in a subtle way referencing this throughout the Haggadah. Just go back to the beginning. The child asks Ma Nishtana, and the teretz is, so we mentioned that in the Seder of the Haggadah, just the structure of it, we give two terutzim. The first is Shmuel's teretz, and the second is Rab's teretz, based on the machlokes Rav and Shmuel, what exactly Maschel B'Gnus is in the Gemara Pesachim Kuf Tezayin Amud Aleph. But according to Shmuel, the first teretz that we mentioned in the Haggadah, Avodim Hayinu lefare b'Mitzrayim. Vayotzienu Hashem Elokeinu misham b'yad chazaka v'zrei metuya. We don't say avodim hayu aviseinu. We say avodim hayinu. In fact, the next sentence we almost say it with baktzena. The ilu lehoitzi hakadosh baruch hu es aviseinu mi Mitzrayim harei anu uvanenu uvnei vanenu mishubadim hayinu lepare b'Mitzrayim. So right away, when we mention avodim hayinu, we're bringing out this point of chayev adam lirois es atzmai ki ilu hu yotzei mi Mitzrayim. When you go through the Maschel Bignus in the world of Rav, so where does it begin? Mitchila oivdei avodah zara hayu aviseinu va'achshav kervanu hamakom la'avodah. We don't just say Mitchila oivdei avodah zara hayu aviseinu and then HaKadosh Baruch Hu took our zaydas and he was mekarev them la'makom. It's va'achshav kervanu hamakom la'avodah. Again, we're emphasizing the fact that we ourselves had this yitziyah and this is somehow affecting us. But the bottom line is, this is another one of the halachas that are unique to the way we tell the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim at the Leil HaSeder. Just one more point before we start Hallel. In the second shir, we mentioned that Reb Chaim Brisker at his Seder used to always say that there's an obligation to tell the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim at the Leil HaSeder. There's also an obligation to mention Yetzias Mitzrayim every single day. Pamayim ba'ahava. Ba'yoyim u'balayla. And Reb Chaim used to say, what's the difference between the mitzvah to tell the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim every day, what's known as the mitzvah of Schiras Yetzias Mitzrayim, versus the mitzvah that's once a year, what's known as the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. And Reb Chaim would say that there's three chilukim. Number one, when you're mekayim the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, you have to be maschul begnus u'mesayim b'shvach. Number two, Reb Chaim said, when you mekayim the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, you have to do it derech shaylo tshuva. Manishtana halayla azemi kol haleilos. And finally, Reb Chaim said, Rabbi Gamliel loimer kol shaloi amash shloisha dvarim elu bepesach lo yotzi yedei chayvase ve'elu hein. You have to mention Pesach Matzah Umara, and then you have to say Pesach zu shanu oichlin l'shoma, etc. That's something that's unique to the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. The truth is, after going through the Haggadah a little bit, and going through many of the Mishnayos without even noticing, in Perek Arvei Psachim and the Mechiltas and the Sefris, I think there's more chilukim between the mitzvah of Schiras Yetzias Mitzrayim and the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. Number one, the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim includes in it that you have to be doiresh me'arami oivedavi. That was a huge deal. In fact, the Rambam, that we made a big deal about, says that when we say in the Haggadah, Kol HaMarbel L'Saper B'Tzias Mitzrayim Harei Zeh Meshubach, it means specifically if someone's Marbel Lidrosh in the parasha of Arami Oivedavi. The mitzvah of Schiras Yetzias Mitzrayim, I don't think is mechayev anybody to go and to darshan specifically Arami Oivedavi. If it is, we've never been mekayim the mitzvah, because where's the mention of Arami Oivedavi in the parasha of Kriyishma, which is l'chura where we're mekayim the mitzvah of Schiras Yetzias Mitzrayim. Here's another one. We mentioned that the Mishnah Berurah in the end of Simin Tafayin Gimel brings v'shem d'chayi Adam that when you're saying the Haggadah, when it comes to the Eser Makos, make sure that you say it in a language that everybody's going to understand it. Even have to call in the infamous Misharsis, right? Make sure everybody is in the room, because the counting of the 10 Makos is critical to the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. And we said Pashup Shad is because it's Psukim in the Torah and the end of Va'era by Makos Barad and the beginning of Boi by Makos Arba, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe that I'm hardening the heart of Paroi and I'm messing with him, I'm manipulating him because I want to bring more Makos. What's the purpose of all these Makos? L'man tesaper baznei bincho ben bincho es asher salalti. So it's clear in the Psukim that the Makos were given for us to one day tell the tale. We mentioned from the Haflah that what came first? Was it the Makos that came first? Therefore we have a mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. Says the Haflah, the chicken and the egg. It's actually just the opposite. It's because there would be a mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim that HaKadosh Baruch Hu made the Makos. So for sure the Makos is an integral component to the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. That's not something you have to mention every day. That's for sure something that's unique to the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. How about the portion of the Haggadah that we just read? B'chol dar v'dar chayev adam lirois es atzmoi ki'ilu hu yatsa mi Mitzrayim. That obligation that you have to be able to somehow get very creative with your imagination and act as if you yourself were slaves in Mitzrayim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu took you out. That's not something you have to do every day. That's something that's unique to the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. We mentioned the Reb Shmuel Yankiv, his Meirich in his Haggadah, with the diik that he makes in the Rambam in his Sefer HaMitzvahs and the Chinuch in his Sefer HaMitzvahs, that there's two dinim to the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. It's not enough to just mention the miracles, but you have to give Shevach v'hoida to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, lefichach anachnu chayavim l'hoida islahalo. Which, by the way, it sounds like maybe that's related to chayav adam liris es atzmai. Because chayav adam liris es atzmai, that's what's mechayev lefichach anachnu. And that's why you have it dafka by the Leila Seder with this chayav adam liris es atzmai. That's why you don't have it by the regular mitzvah of Schiras Yitzias Mitzrayim. But this is not a time for lumdus. But the bottom line is, Reb Chaim said that there's three chilukim in terms of the mitzvah of Schiras Yitzias Mitzrayim, Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim, Maschu b'gnus Mitzrayim b'shvach, the fact that you have to do it derech shayla tshuva. Rabbi Gamliel learned kol shalayim shleisha dvarim alalu l'chayru, just from going through the Haggadah. Yeah, you have to be derish by a Rabbi Yehudavi. You have to talk about the 10 makis. Chayiv adam liris es atzmai. It's not enough just to mention it, but you have to also give shevach v'yidat HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In the second shir, we reference that in the Haggadah Shal Pesach, Shiras HaLeviim, Briska, or one of the Briska Haggadahs, so they have a shir brought from Rav Shalom David HaLevi, where he was mefakfik a little bit on Reb Chaim's 3 things. L'chura, why is it only 3? A little bit of what we just mentioned is there, but again, these are very, very obvious ha'aris. Tein l'chacham v'yech gamoy. You have to learn of Reb Chaim. Why did Reb Chaim say there's only 3 chilukim? I don't know. Back of the envelope, I'm already holding by 7. I'm sure there's many more, regardless. On that note, we said that because Chayav Adam Liris is Atzmai Kilu Hu Yatzim in Mitzrayim, Lefichach Anachnu Chayavim Lahidus Ulahal. And we made a huge deal. One of the themes of the Shiurim was that B'Leil HaSeder, it's not enough to only talk about the miracles and be Mechazik or Amunah, but we also have to give Hoidah to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's really the next segment of the Haggadah, which is Hallel. Now, it's very interesting because we're about to start Hallel. We've all said Hallel before. First of all, when we say Hallel, we start with a bracha, right? Don't you always make a bracha before you say Hallel? No bracha. So that already tells you that this Hallel maybe is a little bit different. Truth is, if you look in the Rishonim say that we don't make a bracha on Hallel, stating that this paragraph, Lefichach anachnu chayavim l'hodos lahallel shabeach l'far l'roimim, that acts in lieu of a bracha. Meaning, you're saying Lefichach anachnu chayavim, which pashut is really behemshech the chayav adam liris es atzmai. But the bottom line is, that paragraph is like a super bracha. So you don't have to make a bracha. In fact, some Rishonim ask a kasha that why is it that you don't make a bracha she'asa nisam l'avoseinu Bayomim Mahim Bazman Hazeh. You make that bracha, Chanukah, Purim. How come you don't make the bracha of Sha'asa Nisan? So in the Rishonim, it's included in Lefichach Anachnu Chayavim. So Lefichach Anachnu Chayavim is a bracha on the Hallel. It's a Sha'asa Nisan. It's an interesting discussion if you take a look in the Rishonim. But again, the first anomaly about this Hallel is that we're not going to make a bracha. But there's a much bigger anomaly. And that is, we're going to mention the first 2 paragraphs of Hallel. And then we're going to party. We're going to have a Suda. We're going to eat. There's going to be some more wine. And really, until much later in the evening, we're not going to resume saying Hallel. So where do you find such an idea of being mafsik to Hallel? And by the way, there's a concept of a Chatzi Hallel. It's not this. Chatzi Hallel is when you skip Loilonu and Ahafti. This is a literal Chatzi Hallel. So Pashub Shah, what's going on over here? So if you take a look at the Haggadah of the Abarbanel, Zevach Pesach. And if you take a look at the Haggadah of the Vilna Goyim, Shneim Nischavnu L'Davar Echad, they both say the same exact thing. And that is, that really, if you ever learn Hallel, we have to put that on our bucket list. But if you ever learn Hallel properly, you'll notice Hallel is made up of 2 components. There's the first 2 paragraphs of Hallel, and then there's the rest of Hallel. Said the Abarbanel, and said the Gra, the first 2 paragraphs of Hallel talk about Yetzias Mitzrayim. The balance of the Hallel talk about us praising HaKadosh Baruch Hu for things He didn't even do yet. For things that He's going to do, la'asid lavai. This chelik of the Seder is clearly all about the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. So in the context of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, in the context of giving Haggadah to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the events that took place by Yetzias Mitzrayim, we mention these two paragraphs because these two paragraphs are very much in line, composed by David HaMelech, although the Gemara in Psachim, Daf Kuf Yud Zayin, the Perek Arbi Psachim, that sources these prakim maybe literally to the times that the Yidden left Mitzrayim. But these two paragraphs talk about Yetzias Mitzrayim, and we're in the middle of being Mesaper Yetzias Mitzrayim. We have to give Haggadah, so it's very appropriate to use these two paragraphs. But the rest of Hallel has nothing to do with Yetzias Mitzrayim. The rest of Hallel is related to La'asad Lavai, and that, by the way, obviously we're not going to get to this in Tavshin Pei Vav, but that, by the way, is really the focus and the theme of the second half of the Seder. And this is really in line with something that the Sfarim HaKadoshim say, that if you want, you could make a yachatz on the Seder. And that is that everything up until the end of the Suda, that focuses on the Yetziah of Mitzrayim. And then we turn our attention to hoping and really beseeching HaKadosh Baruch Hu to redeem us again, just like He had in the past. And being that the rest of Hallel is Haidah for events that are going to take place in the future, it's all La'asad Lavai dig, so therefore it's appropriate to recite that Chelek of Hallel during the La'asad Lavai portion of the Haggadah. But the bottom line is, we're going to now go through the two prakim of Hallel. I think it's kedai to just read it inside and type it. Why not? Hashlomas ha'inyan. And on that note, Hallelujah. Praise the HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hallelujah, Avdei Hashem. The Avdei Hashem, the servants of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, they praise HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hallelujah Hashem Hashem. They praise, not HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If you look in the Mefarshei Tehillim, they all say that it's impossible to be Mahal HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We have no Hasaga in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But the shame of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which in the Kabbalistic world is code for the Midos, the Anhagos, the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals Himself, the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Rachum, V'chanun, those are things that we can relate to a little bit, and as a result, those are things that we're capable of being Mahalo. Yehi Shem Hashem Evayrach, may the name, again, not Hashem, but may the name of Hashem be blessed, may Ata v'yadoyim, from now until forever. Mi Mizrach Shemesh Ad Mevoyoy, Mahulal Shem Hashem. If you look at the Mefarshei Tehillim, what does it mean, Mi Mizrach Shemesh Ad Mevoyoy? So it sounds like we should praise Hashem from when the sun rises until the sun sets. So you look up your way of figuring out what time the sun rises and the sun sets. So from 5:22 until Rabbeinu Tam, you're going to praise HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Then you'll take a little break, and then rinse and repeat. You'll do it again in the morning. Chalila. That's not what it means. Because that almost sounds like you're not always praising HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's only Mimizrach Shemesh Ad Mevoye. Mimizrach Shemesh means from where the sun rises, Ad Mevoye, until where the sun sets. It's actually focusing on Makoy, not on Zman. The sun rises in the east, it sets in the west. Thus, Mizrach Shemesh Ad Mevoye means from sea until shining sea. It means everywhere. Mehulal Shem Hashem HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Gebetch. In fact, if you take a look at the Abar Benel, so classic. Again, I think we tried bringing out the point as much as possible that the Abar Benel on the Haggadah is very, very critical. Not easy, but critical. But here's the point. Says the Abar Benel, if you do a little bit of a sikkum, you'll see that there's four things that we just mentioned. We mention who praises, we mention who we praise, we mention when we praise, and we mention from where we praise. Who praises? Hallelu Avdei Hashem. Who do we praise? Hallelu Es Shem Hashem. When do we praise? Yishem Hashem Mevorach Me'ata V'yadoylom. And where do we praise? Mimizrach Shemesh Ad Mevorach. Mahulal Shem Hashem. So again, we start off Hallelujah, but who are the praisers? Who's the praisee? When are we praising? And from where are we praising? Either way, what's the Haidah? Ram al kol goyim Hashem al hashamayim kavodah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Ram. He's bigger. He's greater than all the nations. In fact, al hashamayim kavodah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's covered His glory is all the way up in the heavens. Mi kashem aleikeinu hamagbil shaves. Who is like HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who sits so high, yet hamashpili lira is tashamayim ba'aretz. But at the same time, he lowers himself to see what's going on. Mikimi me'afradal. HaKadosh Baruch Hu lifts from the dirt the dull, the poor person. Me'ashpois Yorim Evyain. From the Ashva, HaKadosh Baruch Hu lits up the Evyain. That's a synonym of Dal. Lo Hishivi im Nedivim Yamai. HaKadosh Baruch Hu does that to now place this Dal, to place this Evyain together with the Nedivim, with the royals, with the ministers, in Nedivim Yamai, with the Nedivim of his nation. Moishivi Akeres Habayis. HaKadosh Baruch Hu returns the Akeres Habayis. So if you look at Even Ezra says that Saf is a little misleading. What it should read as is Moishivi Akara Habayis. So the Akara who doesn't have a house, the Akara who doesn't have any children, HaKadosh Baruch Hu returns the Akara to her house, gives her a house. Eim Habanim Semecha, the mother who's didn't have any children will now have children. Hallelujah. That is the way we praise HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So a couple of things. First of all, so Romal Kol Goyim Hashem Al Hashemayim Kavoidoi. Mik Hashem Elokeinu hamagbihi l'shaves, hamashpili, mikimi, lohishivi, moishivi. The yud at the end, isn't that a little misleading? Right, usually, what does that yud mean? Right, it's sheli, it belongs to me. Nosati, I gave. V'lokachti escham lila. Right, v'yitzesi v'hitzalti v'ga'alti v'lokachti. Good sushta, right? Over here you have hamagbi, hamashpili, mikimi, and L'Hoishivi. Hamagbi, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I picked up for me, L'Shaves. So if you look at Rashi on Tehillim, Rashi says no. Rashi says that very often in Psalms, in poetry, there was a yud that was thrown in at the end of the word, just to give a little, poetic flair to it. And Rashi says, don't get distracted by these yuds. So really, it's not hamagbihi in the possessive form, but it's hamagbi lo shavas, hamashpil liros b'shamayim ba'aretz, making me'ofar dal, lo hishiv im nedivim, moishiv akeres habayis. Where else does Rashi say this? So we spoke about this in the Chumash here. By Ozi Yashir, Rashi made the same exact observation. Rashi said, Ozi v'zimros ka, right? Yemincha Hashem nedori b'koyach. Rashi said there's a lot of yuds in the Oz Yashir. All those yuds is because this is a shira, and in the shira there's always poetic license, and you're always going to use different letters or different words just to make it a little bit more poetic, and that's exactly what's going on over here. So all these yuds over here are a little distracting in terms of understanding the Pshutei Shel Mikra, but make believe the yud wasn't there just from the Kavanah perspective, because really it's not being moisef in the Kavanah. It's just here in terms of making the song go a little bit nicer. Now we mentioned that all the Sfarim say, we mentioned from the Abarbanel and the Goyen, that the first two prokim of Tehillim focus on Yetzias Mitzrayim. That means, really, what we just mentioned here seems to have taken place circa Yetzias Mitzrayim. So what do we mention here? Again, the first two psukim was talking about who's Mahalal, who are we Mahalal, when are we Mahalal, and from where are we Mahalal? Klar, Abarbanel. Okay, so what now is the subject of the Hillel? We're being Mahalal HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why? Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Ramal Kol Goyim Hashem Al Hashemayim Kavodah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is greater than all the nations. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is so big. Ramal Kol Goyim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu dominates the nations. When did HaKadosh Baruch Hu dominate the nations by Yetzias Mitzrayim? That's the Ba'achav of the Abarbanel, right? That's one of the big inyanim of Amunah that the Ramban talks about, and then the Parshas Boy. Bavur Teda ki ein kamoini b'chal haaretz. Ram al kol goyim Hashem al shamayim kavodah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was also shvatim with the Mitzrim uba Eloheihem, and by that he showed that he's greater than all the nations. Mik Hashem Elokeinu hamagbi l'shaves hamashpili liros b'shamayim v'aretz. Who's like HaKadosh Baruch Hu who's magbi l'shaves? HaKadosh Baruch Hu's so up high, but at the same time he lowers himself liros b'shamayim v'aretz to see everything that's going on. And he'll do things about it. When exactly did that play itself out? Oh, that's the second of the three things that the Abarbanel talked about. That's the Adash. That you should know, Ki ani Hashem b'kerev haaretz. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Yodeya, he's Mashkiach. Mik Hashem Elokeinu hamagbi l'shaves, hamashpi liros b'shamayim v'aretz. HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows, he cares, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu literally is being Mashkiach. He's being Mashkiach in what's going on in the world. And then finally, Mikimi me'ofar dol me'ashves yar me'evyoim lo'shivim nedivim and nedivei yamay, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is actually going to do something about that Ashkacha. And what did he do? He did something to Klal Yisrael. So really, the messages that the Abarbanel said, which are the three core tenets of our faith that we're supposed to take out of the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, are expressed right here in this paragraph. We'll be Mahal HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I mean, the fact that we're being Mahal HaKadosh Baruch Hu means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu exists. Yehi Shem Havayim Mevorach, that's easy. Rama Kol Goyim Hashem Al HaShamayim Kavoidoi, Mikimi Meyofer Dom Yashbetz Yor Mevim Leishim Nedivim Divi Amid, that talks about the Kol Yochel of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Magbi Lo Shoves, but at the same time Mashpili Lirois Hashamayim Uvaretz. That too is something that is a testament to the Hashkacha of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. All the ideas of the Emunah that we're supposed to take out of the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim are all being manifest right here. Either way. So again, the first of the two Prakim of Hallel, which talk about Yetzias Mitzrayim, we talk about being Mahal HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we just mentioned that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has all these different milas that we said are essentially the tenets of our faith. Now, when did HaKadosh Baruch Hu do all this? When did he show this? Again, we gave it away. We said it was by Yetzias Mitzrayim. And now we mention it inside. B'tzeis Yisrael mi Mitzrayim, Beis Yaakov me'am loyes. That you want to know when this took place? It took place when Klal Yisrael left Mitzrayim. When Beis Yaakov left a foreign nation. Hoyse Yehuda L'Kacha. It was at that time that Yehuda became the holy nation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yisrael Mam Shelo Yisav, and Klal Yisrael became the subjects. I mean, HaKadosh Baruch Hu became the king over Klal Yisrael. Now, what does it mean, Yehuda and Yisrael? So, Pasha, when you learn Tanakh, you know that the word Yehuda, Judea, Judah, right, is very much synonymous with the Jewish people. So, in a psalm, it would make a lot of sense to say, Hoyse Yehuda L'Kachai, Yisrael Mam Shelo Yisav. It's very poetic. That's the Pashup shot. But if you take a look at Rashi in Tehillim, Rashi says that the reason we're giving Yehuda a shout out over here is because we're talking about, or we're about to talk about, Kriyas Yamsuf. The next pasuk, Hayom Ra'av Vayonos. And who was the first person to jump into the Yamsuf? It was Nachshon ben Aminadav. And because the first person to jump in was Nachshon ben Aminadav, so for that reason, his whole shape in Yehuda gets this special mention over here. Either way, so what happened? Hayom Ra'av Vayonos. The Yam saw Klal Yisrael coming and the Yam ran away. Right, if you could just do the visual over here. Right, you see somebody coming towards you and you're scared of the person, you start running for your life. So it sounds like that's what happened. Hayom Ra'av, better cross the street, right? Vayonos. And you make a beeline. Hayarden Yisayv la'achar. The Jordan River also was Yisayv la'achar. It also went backwards. It started retreating. Now, when did that happen? Hayarden Yisayv la'achar. So if you look in the Rishonim, there's two mahalchim. One mahalchim in the Rishonim is, it's because Chazal say that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu split the sea, all the seas everywhere split. So the same time of Hayom Ra'av Vayonos, it was also Hayarden Yisayv la'achar. Other Rishonim say that this is referring to when Yeshua ben Nun crossed the Yarden together with the Yidden when they actually entered Eretz Yisrael. So even though we're talking B'tzeis Yisrael mi Mitzrayim, it feels like more the moment of Yetzias Mitzrayim, but we just fast forwarded 7 days to talk about Kriyas Yamsuf, so now we're fast forwarding 40 years, and we're talking about Hayarden Yisayv la'achar. Haharim Raktu Elim. The mountains danced like Elim, like rams. Givais, and all the hills, they also were dancing Kivnei Tzai, like sheep. When did this happen? So the Rishonim say this happened by Maimir Har Sinai. So all the mountains and the Gvais that were near Har Sinai, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu came to be Mashra his Shechina on Har Sinai, so there was a whole Rikida going on, literally, Haharim Raktu, right? That's what was happening. So this was talking about by Maimon Har Sinai. So again, we have a mention of B'tzeis Yisrael mi Mitzrayim. That's generally when the Yidden left Mitzrayim. A shout out to Kriyas Yamsuf, Hayom Ra'av Vayonos. A shout out to Hayarden Yisayv la'achar. That's when Yeshua ben Nun, according to some Rishonim, crossed the Yarden. Harim Raktu Elam Gvais Kivnei Tzai. That's referring to Maimon Har Sinai. Malacha Yom Kisanis. So now we ask the Yam, right? Who are you running from? Hayarden Tisad la'achar. Yarden, who are you afraid of? Haharim Tirkutu Elam Gvais Kivnei Tzai. Why are the mountains and the hilltops? Why are you dancing like a bunch of sheep? What's going on over here? The teretz is milifnei adon chuli yaretz. It's because the Shekhinah is coming. The Creator of the world. Chuli means Creator. The Creator of the world is coming. Milifna Eloika Yaakov. The God of the Bnei Yaakov is coming. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is someone from whom we need to be afraid. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is someone from whom we need to run from. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is somebody that we have to dance for. You know why? Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is someone that's able to ahichti atzur agamoyim. He's able to take a tzur. He's able to take a rock and convert it into water, which the Rishonim say happened to Parshas B'Shalach in Mara. Chalomish l'mayne mayim. A chalomish is also a type of rock. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is able to take a rock and turn it into a mayin of mayim. That's referring to when Moshe Rabbeinu by the Mei Meriva, when it happened the second time in Parshas Chukas. You want to know why we're running? We're running from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What's HaKadosh Baruch Hu able to do? He's able to be hoich bi'atzur agamoyim. He's able to make a chalomish l'mayne mayim. Hence the gerida. Hence this very dramatic reaction to the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is coming right now. So this second paragraph, that's obviously talking about Yetzias Mitzrayim. It begins, B'tzeis Yisrael mi Mitzrayim, and it's for that reason that we mention it here. A couple of just very obvious ha'aras. Number one, so it seems that the Yam, let's start with that, was Rav Ayonos. Why? We ask him, why were you Rav Ayonos? Right? Why is this something that you did? And the Yam told us, Milifnei Adon Chuli Yaretz, Milifnei Eloika Yaakov. It would appear that by Kriyas Yamsuf, there was a special gilui of the Shekhinah. So much so that it scared the Yam. Right? The Yam said, I'm running, I'm scared for my life. What are you scared of? Milifnei Adon Chuli Yaretz, Milifnei Eloika Yaakov. I know the koyach of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and as a result, I'm getting out of here. I'm pashut afraid. But clearly implying, again, just read the psukim, nothing fancy, that the Adon Chuli Yaretz, the Eloika Yaakov was niskala ba'ifin nifla at the Yamsuf. Right? Just to bring out this point. We know Hashem is everywhere, so what do you mean, now I'm running? The Yam doesn't run every day of the week. So why all of a sudden it wasn't running here? The teretz is because the Shekhinah was about to come. And I think it's Pashat. This is in line with Reid that we spoke about in the Chumash Shiurim. And that is that at the end of the Shira, at the end of Az Yasher, Klal Yisrael said, Hashem yimloich li'olam v'ed. Why did Klal Yisrael say that? So Pashat Pshat is, and if you look at the Rishonim, that's how they explain it. It's because at Kriyas Yamsuf, Klal Yisrael saw the Malchus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rasa shivcha bayam, mashaloi ra yechesko bambuzi me'olam. And the Rishonim say that that's all merumis in zeh keli vanveil, because the word zeh is like babru zeh. B'shosh yesh matzu mar munachim lefanecha. Zeh always means you're able to look something between the eyes. You're able to point to it. So at the time of Kriyas Yamsuf, there was a zeh keli vanveil. There was a rasa. And by the way, we say in David, we saw the Malchus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's why we said Hashem Yimloich Liyom Avad. That means there was an incredible Gilui of Malchus Shamayim at the time of Kriyas Yamsuf. That's exactly what the Yam was scared of. The Shivcha, everybody said there was an incredible Hiskalos. And that's what caused the Yam to run away. How do we know that's what caused the Yam to run away? Because that's what the Yam said. We asked him, Malachayom Kisonos, where are you going? He says, I'll tell you exactly where I'm going. Milifnei Adon Chuli Yaretz, Milifnei Eloika Yaakov. So it's mefurish in the pasuk that the Adon Chuli Yaretz, the Eloika Yaakov was very, very present at the time of Kriyas Yamsuf. And that's exactly the Zakelu Vandeyu, that's the Rasul Shivcha Bayam, that's Malchuscha Rov Vanecha Beikei Ayam Lefnei Moshe. That's why Klal Yisrael said Hashem Yimloch Liyom Avad. So the Yam ran for the hills. Pardon the pun. What did Klal Yisrael do? Klal Yisrael was mekabel on Malchus Shamayim. Klal Yisrael said Hashem Yimloch Liyom Avad, but I think that's Pasha Pshat what's going on over here. One more ha'ara. I'm sure everybody's thinking this ha'ara. I think 12th shir on the Haggadah, and that is, again, it's the first time I chap this. The Yam ran, the Yarden ran, the mountains and the hilltops are doing the hara. Everyone's dancing, and we want to know why. And we ask, Malucha Yom Kisanos Hayarden Kisav La'achar. Heharim Tirkidu Che'elim Gevayis Kidnai Tzayin. And it gives you a whole teretz. It's Milifnei Adon Chuli Yaretz, Milifnei Eloika Yaakov. If this parak of Tehillim would follow all the other prakim in Tanakh, it would read like this: Hayom Rav Vayonos Hayardin Yisrael La'achar Heharim Raktu Che'elim Gvois Kivnei Tzayin Milifnei Adon Chuli Yaretz Milifnei Eloi Kayakov Ha'ich Bi'atzua Gamayim Chalamish L'mayim Amayim. And every chazan would have to tweak his nusach a little bit, but this is the way you would read. But we throw in two extra psukim: Malucha Yom Kisanos Hayardin Yisrael La'achar Heharim Tirkedu Che'elim Gvois Kivnei Tzayin. It's because this paragraph is telling the story of Yitzias Mitzrayim, and Yitzias Mitzrayim daf mezogen derech shaylu tshuva, and this is mamish the derech shaylu tshuva in the parsha of B'tzeis Yisrael Mitzrayim. So we do it derech shaylu tshuva. I think it's pasha. Malucha yom kisanos hayardei tislay lachar heharim tirkedu che'elim gevayis kivnei tzayin. It's milifnei adon chuli yaretz. It's milifnei Eloi Kayakov. We're not just telling the story of B'tzeis Yisrael Mitzrayim. We're doing it derech shaylu tshuva. That's the malucha yom kisanos. That's the what's going on. Why harim tirkedu che'elim gevayis kivnei tzayin? Either way, we now return to the Haggadah. Yichasa hamatzos v'yikach hakois b'yodei v'yoymar Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher ga'alanu v'ga'alas avi yiseinu miMitzrayim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu redeemed us. Chayiv Adam Liris is atzmai kilu hu yatsa miMitzrayim v'ga'alas avi yiseinu, and He took out, of course, our ancestors as well. V'giyanu alayla hazeh, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought us to this night. Lechol by matzah umara, for us to have the schus to be mekayim the mitzvahs of the Seder, to eat matzah umara. But just like HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you did this for us, now we digress into a tefillah. Kein Hashem Elokeinu v'lekav yiseinu yagienu l'mayadim v'liregalim acherim abam l'kuseinu l'shalom. You should allow us to arrive to days that are going to be even greater than this day. Mayadim and regalim. Smeichen b'vinyanei recha. Days where we're going to be besimcha because you will have rebuilt your holy city. And we're going to be rejoicing over the fact that in Yerushalayim Yirah Kodesh we're going to have a Beis HaMikdash and we're going to be able to do the Avodah. And when we have that, we'll be able to eat from the Zvachim, after, of course, we do a zrika. After the dam of the zvachim and the psachim are going to go on the wall of the mizbeach, and it's going to be l'ratzah. And then we're going to sing for you a new song. Al geula seinu, on the new geula. Val ptus nafsheinu, the fact that you redeemed our nefesh. Baruch atah Hashem, Gal Yisrael, and then behaseba. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech ha'olam boirei peri hagafen. So before we say goodbye, v'tavshin pei vav, the Haggadah, shiurim, just a few ha'aras. The first ha'ara is a davar nifla that I heard from Yedidi Haggayin, from Moshe Shlomo Yachshlita, the Baal Oitzvus Chasam Sofer. We mentioned lefichach anachnu chayavim lahoidos lahalel l'shabeach lefar l'roimim lahadel l'varach alu l'kalis l'misha asal aviseinu v'lanos kol anisa ma'ela hoitziyanu mei avdus l'cheres miyodein l'simcha umei eva l'yomtev. What do we mean when we say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu took us mei eva l'yomtev? What exactly was the avelos that the Yidden experienced in Mitzrayim that we're now mentioning that HaKadosh Baruch Hu took us me'evel liyantev? Pasha, you would think that maybe it's related to the fact that a lot of Jews died in Mitzrayim. The 4/5, you have the kolaben that was thrown into the Nile River. But where did that avelos turn into a yantev? It's mistaber that people that lost loved ones in Mitzrayim continued to mourn their brethren, their children, their parents, whoever it might have been. That avelos was nepach liyantev mechatesi. Whoever said that? Where do you find that by Yetzias Mitzrayim there was an avelos that was nepach liyantev? Again, there was avelos in Mitzrayim, but you don't find that it was nepach liyantev. Just because these Yidden were redeemed, that means they forgot about all those people, and now all of a sudden, instead of it being an Avelos, it's going to be a Yontif. At first glance, it's a little sussum. What exactly is the Me'evel Yontif? If you take a look at the Vilna Gaon, in his Pirush on the Haggadah, so the Gaon says, U'me'evel hu etzel har Sinai. Comes up with a little bit of a pshat that's not so much in Pshutei Shal Mikra. If you take a look at the Haggadah of the Maaseh Hashem, it also comes up with a little bit of a mahalach that's not al pi Pshutei Shal Mikra. And the reason that the Achronim are not being mefarish al derech pshat, at least the Pasha pshat of why they're not being mefarish al derech pshat, is because it's very sasum what the derech pshat is. Where was there an Eivel that was nepach liyantiv? It's a subtle question, but l'chayra a bomb kasha. Rav Shlomo stellt zu a Chasam Sofer that literally only the Chasam Sofer could say. And really, once you hear this Chasam Sofer, the pshat Rav Shlomo said is l'chura emes la'amitay mamish, and that is everybody knows that on the ka'ara, one of the foods that we put is an egg. Why do we put an egg? So if you look at the Rishonim, the Ramah brings it. It's zecher to the avelus of the Beis Hamikdash. Now, why would we equate? And why would we make a zecher for Churban Beis Hamikdash by the Leil HaSeder? If you want to make a zecher for Churban Beis Hamikdash, you do it on Tisha B'Av, Mishenichnas Av Memata B'Simcha. And by the way, we do a lot of things as a zecher for that. Where does a zecher to Churban Beis Hamikdash come to the Leil HaSeder? So it's your dua that the Rishonim say, and it's based on a Chazal, it's because there's a connection between the night of Tisha B'Av and the night of Yetzias Mitzrayim, and the connection is that the two things fall out on the same night. And being that, well, Tisha B'Av is always going to be the same day of the week as the night of Pesach, so there's already some sort of a connection between the two, and that's where it's manifest this inyan that we make a zecher for Churban Beis Hamikdash on the night of the Leil HaSeder. But if you take a look at the Chasam Sofer in one of his drushes, he says as follows. I'm going to read it inside. Ukimeduma says, I have a different heritage of why it is that we use an egg, zecher la'avelos, why that is one of the things that we put on the ka'ar. I believe because there was an old custom that the Jews had when they were in Mitzrayim. Shebechol yoim aleph shal Pesach, that every single year, on the first day of Pesach, by the Chshuvim in Mitzrayim, Kaharim v'Shevet Levi, Yoim Evel Kamay Tisha B'Av. It was a Yoim of Avelus, like Tisha B'Av. What? When the Yidden were in Mitzrayim, they used to celebrate a Tisha B'Av on Tesvav Nisan. Ki boy nigzar bein absarim golos Mitzrayim, says the Chasam Sofer. Because we know the bris bein absarim happened exactly 430 years before the Yidden left Mitzrayim. And it happened literally on that same night. That means the Gzeira of the bris bein absarim, which came along with the Eimah Chashecha Gedoyla, that took place on Tesvav Nisan. Says the Chasam Sofer, Uba Nilka Chasara El Paray. And it was on that night that Sarah was taken to Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer. When did Paroi take Sarah? It happened on Tesvav Nisan. Boy, Amad Yaakov lifnei Paroi beridet al Mitzrayim. It was on that day that Yaakov stood in front of Paroi 210 years before the Yidden were going to leave Mitzrayim. It happened literally on that night. Kamoshe bi'arti le'il b'drush Parshas Vayechi. Boy, hischol koishi hashibud pesvav. The Koshei Hashibud happened exactly for 86 years. That means it started 86 years before the Yidden left Mitzrayim. It means it started on Tesvav Nisan. And sometimes it's even more than that, because when HaKadosh Baruch Hu revealed himself to Moshe the first time by the snare, and Moshe Rabbeinu came to Paroi, and what did Paroi say? Tichba do avodah al hanoshin. That also happened on Tesvav Nisan. Which means that if you think about it, it was literally a Yom Shehuchpelu by Tzaras, like Tisha B'Av. Literally, think of all the Tzaras that happened. The Gzeira of Yodoya Teda Kigei Yizaracha Beretz Loilahem Ba'avadim V'inu Oisam Arba Mei Hashana, the Eimach HaShecha, the Games HaGoy, the rabbis, all the Dalit Golias that Klai Yisrael were going to have to go through. It was all Merumis. All of these things were inclusive. They were all part and parcel of things that took place at the Bris Bein Absalom, which happened on Tesvav Nisan. Sarah was taken on Tesvav Nisan. Yaakov stood in front of Paroi, which was not an easy thing for him to do. That happened on Tesvav Nisan. The Koshei Hashibud happened on Tesvav Nisan. The Tichba D'Avodah Al Anoshim, which was the Gag Al Gag of the Koshei Hashibud, that happened on Tesvav Nisan. And that's why all the Chshuvim that understood all this, they used to treat that day the way we treat Tisha B'Av. Ella. But then the Yidden left Mitzrayim on Tesvav Nisan. And when the Yidden left Mitzrayim on Tesvav Nisan, Zok the Heilige Chasam Sofer Nepach, That day was Nepach l'sosin u'l'simcha. It went from being a day when the Yidden were mourning to now all of a sudden it was a day that was Nepach l'sosin u'l'simcha. V'nirali zoktich sam soifer l'asei's tam. This is maybe the reason sha'oichem beitza b'leil Pesach. That's maybe the reason we eat an egg the night of Pesach. Zecher le'evel hanal. Hafla v'fella. It's a zecher to the fact that this was once upon a time a day of Avelos. The greatest nahapachu that we've ever had was when the day of Tesva of Nisan went from being a day of Avelos to being a day of Geula. Zok Rav Shlomo Yak. It's Pashat the Chassam Sofer didn't fear ois, but he said there's no suffix in my mind the Chassam Sofer would have feared ois this way, and he even said Lulei the Mistafina. I believe the Chassam Sofer probably said this by his seder. That's Me'evel Yontif. The Me'evel Yontif was there was a day of Avelos and it was literally Nepach. The day was Nepach from being a Yom of Avelos. Tesva of Nisan, it was a day of Tisha B'Av, and now all of a sudden it was Nepach. It all of a sudden became a day of Yontif. The day of Tesva of Nisan was Nepach. It was Nepach to become a day of Yontif. So I just want to be Messiah with one hergish. The hergish is, how did we start Magid? We started Magid, Hol Achma Anya, the Achalu Avasana Ba'arid Mitzrayim. We spoke that from the Abar Benel. Then why do we start Magid Hol Achma Anya? He said because really when there was a Beis HaMikdash, what was the focal point of the Leil HaSeder? The focal point of the Leil HaSeder was the Korban Pesach. But unfortunately we don't have a Beis HaMikdash. And because we don't have a Beis HaMikdash, we don't have a Korban Pesach. So instead of the focal point being the Korban Pesach, the focal point are the matzahs. See, he said we start off the Seder and we say Hol Achma Anya de Achalu Avasana Ba'arid Mitzrayim. With a krecht. We pick up the matzah. This is unfortunately leider. This is the centerpiece. This is the entree of the Leil HaSeder. And we refer to it as Lachma Anya, bringing out the point of the matzah that represents not Geula, but the point of the matzah that represents Oini. It represents Inui. It represents Oni. That's the component of the matzahs that we bring out. And then we say that because we don't have a Korban Pesach, and because what we have is merely the lechem oini, so called dich ben Yosef v'yechol, called ditzri Yosef v'yifsach. When there was a Korban Pesach, you had to be from the Menuyin. When there was a Korban Pesach, you had to be from the Tahirim. But now we don't have a Korban Pesach. Now we have Matzah. Is Memela, called dich ben Yosef v'yechol, called ditzri Yosef v'yifsach. But then we fear Rois with a tefillah, hashata acha, l'shana abba ba'ardi Yisrael, hashata abdu l'shana abba b'nei chayrin, zol mezoicha zayin taka. To have, again, a Beis HaMikdash with the centerpiece is going to be the Korban Pesach. But how do we start Magid? We start Magid Hol Achma Anya de Achalu Avasana Ba'arid Mitzrayim. We started with a krecht. We started bemoaning the fact that we don't have the Korban Pesach. How do we end Magid? What's the very, very end of Magid? We turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We thank Hashem first for bringing us to this point. And then we say, Kein Hashem Elokeinu v'lekav Yisenu yagienu l'mayadim v'l'regalim acherim abam v'kasenu l'shalom. Smeicha b'vinyan irecha v'sasem avodasecha. V'noichal sham min azvachim u'min apsachim asher yagia damam al kir mizbechacha l'ratzoin. V'noidelecha shir chadash agula seinav al ptus nafshein. We conclude with a tefillah again for the Korban Pesach. We start Magid. We start Magid Hol Achma Anya. This is the centerpiece of our Seder. And we end again with a tefillah that we should taka be zoicha, v'noichal sham min azvachim and apsachim. We should be zoicha that at least by the next Seder, it shouldn't be centered around the lechem oini, but rather it should be v'noichal sham min azvachim u'min apsachim. This is a chsima me'ein apsicha. But just to say the hergish a little bit tiefer, ki meitzeischa me'eretz Mitzrayim arenu neflois. The Nevi'im promised us that one day we're going to be zoichet to see miracles that are going to dwarf the miracles that we saw when we left Mitzrayim. When the Yidden left Mitzrayim, we were zoichet, said the Heilige Chassam Sofer to Avenapachu. We went and took a day that was Hukfala morning. It was a day of Eivel. And it was Nepach from being a day of Eivel to a day of Yontif. Ki meitzeischa me'eretz Mitzrayim arenu neflois. We were promised by the Nevi'im that all the tzoimos, all the fasts, u'berosham Tisha B'Av, these are going to be days. These are going to be days that are going to be Nepach again. To days of Sasoin v'Simcha. Ki meitzeischa me'eretz Mitzrayim arenu neflois. We had this Benapachu on Tesvav Nisan. It went from being a day of Eivel to a day of Yontif. So too, we ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we should be zoicha already, that all these days of tzoris, samchenu ki moisi nisanu shnois re'inu ra, they should all be nepach today's of Sasim B'Simcha, the promises of the Nevi'im should be fulfilled. B'Karev Mamish, B'Mheira B'Yameinu, we should be Zoicha to Hashata Hacha L'Shana Abba B'Aradi Yisrael. Hashata Avdi L'Shana Abba B'nei Chayrim. We will sit again with the Zvachim and the Psachim. We'll tell a new story. A story that we don't need to remember from 3,338 years ago, but a story that we will have all witnessed. Not Chayev Adam Liros, it's Atzmai Ki'ilu Hu Yatzam in Mitzrayim. We love the Ki'ilus in this Chabura, but we're ready not for the Ki'ilu. We want to be able to tell the story that we saw with our own two eyes, a story that we were ourselves experienced. And we would be zeicher to that. B'karev mamish, b'mheira b'yameinu, amen v'amen.